Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. I'm George Frampton. I'm a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Global Energy Center, and I'm co-moderating today's discussion on the challenges of tropical deforestation and architecture for REDD plus transactions, ART or ART. And we're happy to be co-hosting this dialogue with Winrock International, which hosts the ART Secretariat. Before we get started, a little housekeeping. We're on the record. We're live streaming to Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. We encourage you to post about today's discussion, share this on social media using hashtag AC Energy, tagging us at AC Global Energy. Those of you who are on this dialogue participating in Zoom can submit questions in the Q&A portal located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can do that at any time during the event, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. Our panelists, who will be introduced in a minute, bring a variety of important perspectives to this discussion on tropical rainforest conservation. It's long been understood that nature-based solutions are going to require some pretty powerful tools. Reducing tropical deforestation is going to mean frameworks for forest credits, offsets, but the REDD plus agenda for approaching these issues has faced a pretty serious set of challenges over the last decade or more, two of which, primary of which are avoiding leakage or avoidance opportunities where protection in one place just drives loggers or ranchers to other areas in a country, and also the problem of financing, because the scale here is going to require a fair amount of high value offsets to be effective. ART, which is a Paris aligned platform, aims to tackle both the leakage problem and the financing problem by directing large scale finance, private finance, to countrywide jurisdictional scale programs. So I'm pleased that we have the opportunity to let folks who are very involved in this talk about it. I'll hand it over now to Francis Seymour, who is a distinguished senior fellow at WRI and is the board chair of ART, to talk more about the program and how to meet Paris targets through natural climate solutions. Francis, over to you.
Thanks so much, George, and thanks to the Atlantic Council for providing this opportunity to share what we think is a really exciting initiative with the potential to once and for all bring tropical deforestation to a close. I'm just going to elaborate briefly on the remarks that you just made and save most of the time for our distinguished panelists, who will be joining us in a few moments. So the first point to make is that the science is clear. We cannot reach the goals of the Paris Agreement without dealing with forests. The IPCC's special report on 1.5 degrees warming, as well as a subsequent report specifically on the land sector, made it clear that we have to not only reduce tropical deforestation to zero, but reverse it to enhance the tropical forest sink, and we have to do that within the next 10 years. The good news is that forest protection and restoration offer quite a significant amount of low-cost mitigation options. This chart shows estimates of the cost-effective mitigation that the land sector can provide, various forest-based intervention options. And you can see that the two longest bars are there at the top, avoided forest conversion, and towards the bottom for the reforestation of forests. And we got to remember when thinking about this, when you conserve forests, you don't just get carbon. You get all kinds of co-benefits related to biodiversity conservation, ecosystem services such as flood control, and contributions to local livelihoods. The further good news is that we actually have global agreement on a framework for doing this. It's called REDD Plus for reducing emissions from forest deforestation and forest degradation, and also enhancing carbon in forested landscapes. And it was negotiated under the UNFCCC and included in the Paris Agreement. Under REDD+, industrialized countries provide financial reward to countries that are successful in reducing emissions and enhancing restoration. And this map shows in red the dozens of countries that are participating at some level in REDD+ initiatives, and in green, the countries that have provided financial support. And yet, we still continue to experience a loss of primary tropical forests at the rate of an area the size of Belgium every year. So, in my view, and as George has already foreshadowed, REDD+ has not yet succeeded for two main reasons. The first is that in the early days of REDD+, and frankly continuing to the present in the voluntary carbon market, a lot of REDD+ is being implemented at the level of small-scale projects, at the level of, say, a national park or other protected area or a collection of villages. And unfortunately, that project scale level of initiative just can't deal with some of the underlying drivers of deforestation, which can be rampant illegality or unclear land tenure or other issues that really only governments can address. Further, they can't deal with the leakage problem that George Frampton mentioned. If we protect a forest in this place, nothing will stop the agents of deforestation from moving down the road and clearing forests there. So we need to include governments, and we need to include them at scale. And that's why REDD+, as ultimately negotiated under the UNFCCC, is to be implemented at the jurisdictional scale, meaning entire countries, or at the level of subnational jurisdictions such as states or provinces. The second reason that REDD+ has not delivered what we had hoped it would is that we really haven't had the finance at scale that we need. When REDD+ was first proposed more than a decade ago, the idea was that global carbon markets would liberate the billions of dollars that we would need to provide a material incentive for forest-rich countries to perform. But in fact, even though the finance has been put to good use in developing REDD readiness, the current annual funding for REDD+ has been limping along on the foreign assistance budgets at the level of about $1 billion a year. But analysis conducted by EDF suggests that we could actually scale this more than an order of magnitude through market forces and private sector demand for forest-based carbon credits. And I think it's important to remember that $1 billion a year might sound like a lot of money, but when we're trying to influence the political economy of countries such as Brazil or Indonesia, which are $1 trillion economies, we need more finance than that. The good news is that the recent cascade of corporate climate targets, such as those illustrated by the logos listed on this slide, promise to perhaps liberate that finance in a way that we haven't seen before. Forest-based emission reductions and removals can provide a complement in the near term to the abatement of fossil fuel emissions that corporations are investing in as they begin to make progress towards their own net zero targets. And that's what brings us to our discussion today about the architecture for REDD+ transactions, or ART, which is designed to provide the confidence that we need in the integrity of forest-based emission reductions and removals to unlock the new large-scale finance to protect and restore forests and reward countries that are delivering those results. And now to explain exactly how we're going to do that, I'm pleased to introduce our first panelist, and that is Mary Grady, who serves as the director of the ART Secretariat based at Winrock International. Now, Mary's a real veteran of the carbon market world, having served for more than a decade at the American Carbon Registry, and is a real expert on all of these issues. But let me ask you, Mary, if you could just start out by elaborating a little bit more on what I've mentioned about what ART is all about and how it, specifically is going to be supportive of the objectives that we've just outlined.
Sure. Thanks, Frances, and thanks for hosting us today, George. Well, ART is a global voluntary carbon crediting program, or architecture as we call it, to register, verify, and issue high-quality REDD emission reduction credits to countries and jurisdictions. And ART's objective, as you pointed out, Francis, is to create confidence in the environmental and the social integrity of REDD+, to attract private sector capital at scale and contribute to Paris Agreement goals. So to achieve these results at scale, ART has a few key design features. The first, which is novel, is that ART credits only at the jurisdictional level to national governments and very large national, subnational jurisdictions. This matters not just for achieving results at scale, but also, as you pointed out, Francis, acting at the jurisdictional level provides incentives to governments and supplier jurisdictions to do what only governments can do, which is regulate land use, enforce the law, and recognize indigenous rights. And working at the jurisdictional level also helps to mitigate some of the key risks inherent in the project-based approach to REDD, such as leakage, and also reversals, which is when a natural event, such as a fire, or a man-made event, such as illegal logging, release stored carbon back into the atmosphere. The second key design feature of ART is that ART is a standalone program independent of government or donor countries and has standardized procedures for all participants. And this is really important because it eliminates the protracted political negotiations in place of having more business-like transactions. And the third design feature of ART is that ART was specifically designed to attract private capital. And private capital flows through markets, and markets need standardization so that REDD credits are comparable among jurisdictions and fungible with emission reductions from other sectors. And in order to attract private capital at scale, market participants really need to have confidence in the integrity of the results, and that's what we aim to provide.
But Mary, I think a lot of people on this call today are probably aware that actually we've had a number of standards in the past. And I wonder how is the ART tree standard different than what we've had before? How does it build on them? And if I'm a potential supplier country, why would I want to choose ART? If I'm a prospective buyer, why would I want to choose ART? And if I'm a member of the public, why do I think ART should be used compared to some of these other standards?
Sure. Well, first, I will spell out that our standard for the measurement, monitoring, reporting, and verification is called the REDD plus Environmental Excellence Standard, or TREES for short. And we developed TREES based on a decade of learning, as described before. So donor governments such as Norway, Germany, UK, and the US have made significant investments in pilot programs to try to transition REDD to a jurisdictional scale. And there have been bilateral agreements with forest countries, multilateral investments through programs like REDD Early Movers, the World Bank Carbon Fund Forest Carbon Partnership Facility, and the Green Climate Fund. And luckily, these programs have helped to build capacity in forest countries and test scientific approaches for quantification and monitoring, and also to develop innovative policy and structural mechanisms to reduce risks. But these programs were not designed to attract private capital at scale. So as we were developing ART, we consciously built on this base of experience to create a crediting program that's fully aligned with the goals of the Paris Agreement and incorporates market elements to provide confidence in results. So this is things like standardized requirements for crediting jurisdictions that actually reduce deforestation against a historical baseline, ensuring that the results are real and verified to have already occurred. And TREES also includes accounting requirements that enhance climate ambition over time, that mitigate the risks of leakage and reversals. It includes requirements that address the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, social and environmental safeguard requirements. We have rules for independent third-party verification of results, and we have the issuance and tracking of serialized credits on a transparent registry. So the advantage that this offers to supplier countries is that they have clear expectations and requirements for crediting under TREES, and also the ability to access private capital and markets. And the advantage that it offers to buyers is that really, given the rigor and standardization of TREES requirements, they can be assured of the integrity of the results. I'd like to quickly also take advantage of this opportunity talking about TREES to note that after 1 year of development, TREES 2.0 is currently published for stakeholder consultation. And the updates that we've made to Trees 2.0 are to broaden the option for art participants. So just highlighting three key areas. One is expanding crediting to include establishment of new forests at the jurisdictional scale, which we also call removals. We've added an innovative crediting approach to reward participants that have high forest cover and low levels of deforestation, also known as high forest, low deforestation, or HFLD jurisdictions. These jurisdictions typically don't earn a lot of credits for reducing deforestation because their deforestation levels are already so low. So this new approach in trees aims to incentivize continued low deforestation in these countries. And lastly, Trees 2.0 proposes an eligibility pathway to recognize indigenous people territories to participate directly or under a national government. All of these proposed updates are innovative and new market approaches, and we hope are going to broaden interest in art.
Thanks, Mary. Just maybe one more question before we move to another panelist. One of the logos in that slide that I projected with all the different logos was CORSIA for the carbon offsetting, carbon offsetting and reduction scheme for international aviation, right? And that was the one that's a compliance regime that was on that slide. And I wonder if you'd say a little bit more about the significance of CORSIA in particular, or the potential for art in compliance markets more generally.
Sure, Francis. Yeah, CORSIA is really a mouthful. So last November, art achieved the important milestone of being approved by the International Civil Aviation Organization to supply credits under the CORSIA. And it's really an important milestone because CORSIA is the first internationally regulated carbon market to approve jurisdictional REDD+ crediting. Credits from REDD+ were disallowed in the UN Clean Development Mechanism under the Kyoto Protocol and under the European Union Emissions Trading Scheme. So CORSIA actually starts this year and runs through 2035. And demand for offsets is forecast to be significant over this period, ranging from 2.5 to 4 billion tons of CO2. Airlines from 88 countries, representing close to 80% of international air traffic, have joined CORSIA's first phase. And while the offset demand from airlines has delayed due to the COVID pandemic, it will rebound. And for now, the approval by ICAO of crediting programs and eligible units such as art has been interpreted by the market as a seal of quality. And since the first programs were approved last year, we've seen increasing interest and demand from voluntary buyers actually outside of the airline industry, including from other hard to abate sectors, because they want to ensure that the credits they're investing in are real, credible emission reductions.
Great, thanks so much, Mary. I'm sure we'll come back to you during the Q&A. Let me now turn to Enric Arderieu. Enric, I believe, is joining us from London today and is going to provide us with a perspective from the private sector that we've been talking about as the potential source of new finance for forests. And Enric, maybe just to start out, you can explain to us what your job is. I understand your title is Head of Low Carbon Trading, and I'm sure the audience would be interested to know about how your role fits in with BP's overall climate commitments and how those commitments to lead you being interested in purchasing REDD+ credits.
Yeah, thank you, Francis. So I would define my job as helping manage BP compliance requirements from different carbon programs around the world, where we either have assets or, for example, we sell products that are covered by a given policy. And those can be kind of a range from cap and trade programs, for example, the one in California, to the South African carbon tax that also allows you to use instruments like offsets, for example. We also source and supply carbon credits for product offers, or what we call in our jargon, voluntary carbon. And we do that both for internal demand and external demand, as we help also play an aggregation role, given the scale of some of the projects and activities that we're involved with. And then on your second question on why we're interested in buying credits from REDD+, I mean, as you outlined, it is a key element of meeting the Paris goals. We need also removals in a net zero world. So, but before you get to removals, you also need large-scale conservation, and REDD allows you to channel finance at scale into stopping deforestation. And I would say also, I think it has evolved as you outlined. Art is one example on that evolution, but I think it's also possible because of the advances that we've had, for example, on monitoring just through satellites. Things that were not possible a few years ago are now possible, and more importantly, just the concept that you outline of developing jurisdictional approaches that give you more confidence as private sector that you can actually achieve high quality credits from REDD programs.
Well, let me just ask you to elaborate then on that very last point. I know that some companies have been burned by exposés in the media that, oh, they're buying, certain credits that turn out to be hot air or have other problems, locally. What is BP looking for in terms of quality, both on the environmental integrity side and the social integrity side? And say a little bit more about why you think jurisdictional credits help deal with those.
Yeah, so the key is always, we need to buy high integrity credits and manage risks like permanence or leakage, for example. And when you think about those, those are much better managed in the context of a jurisdictional program, because you'll have just much better alignment with the kind of relevant state or country policies that help you stop deforestation. We can provide funding associated with that, but you also need policies implemented on the ground, whether it's to incentivize the right frameworks on the ground, or for example also to do enforcement, or both. Project level initiatives still have a role to play, but they need to be nested within those jurisdictional frameworks. And they are important because they need to encourage landowners on the ground to protect their forest. I would say the other piece that it's important is carbon rights are not always owned by the states. So, the programs need to acknowledge that, need to understand land tenure, forest governance, and how that impacts carbon rights. So designing a program that covers all that and provides the right incentives through the right kind of beneficiary sharing agreements is essential. And then the second piece that also ART helps cover is corresponding adjustments and how those are approached. Just to kind of give a very high level context on what it is, corresponding adjustments is adjustments in national inventories of a country related to transferring credits from one country to another. And there is a debate on whether those are needed. My particular view is that they are needed in a Paris world when claims are made outside the host country. But we do need a transition to get there. And the reason for that is because we've not seen yet a corresponding adjustment done under Paris, because the details are still being ironed out. So if we required it right now, investment would stop. So we need to make sure that that's the aim, and we kind of design a transition period to get there and enable it.
Yeah, so I think the issue of corresponding adjustments is probably just one that you're facing, Enric, being a pioneer in this space, because pretty much the whole voluntary carbon market now is in project scale credits. And so I'm curious if you could just give us a little report from the front lines of trying to transact the first jurisdictional scale purchases. What barriers have you encountered? And what does that reply in terms of a continuing role for public finance in this space?
Yeah, so I mean, the biggest issue is I would say readiness. And when I say readiness, is readiness from host countries or state provinces, depending on each country, in actually transacting with the private sector. Most of the activity that has happened in the last, I would say, 10, 15 years has been government to government. But as you outlined in your presentation, that's just relatively small compared to the need that of kind of flows of funding required to stop deforestation. So I think what I see on the ground is that readiness. There's a lot of funding that has gone into readiness, but it has been largely focused on MRV, or what we call monitoring, reporting, and verification. So understanding and measuring deforestation, and we've not necessarily cover that transaction element, as how does a host country engage into transacting those rights. And it's simple things, no? Is who is the actual entity that has the rights? Who do you actually sign with? Is it, are those institutions set up and operational to do that? And then things like, how do you use the funds from REDD? Where do they go to? How are they kind of targeting deforestation? And for example, also, how are indigenous communities part of this program? All those things need to be figured out kind of early on, and we need support from the public sector to understand and develop the frameworks to ensure that that's dealt with.
Great. Okay. Let me now move to Mario Boccucci. Mario serves as the director of something called UN REDD, which is the preeminent United Nations initiative related to REDD Plus that has been in operations for, I guess, more than a decade now, helping countries to prepare themselves to participate in these kinds of transactions. And I wonder, Mario, if you could just start out with a general, snapshot of the significance of forests in developing countries' climate action, ambitions, and what progress you think has been made up to now in readiness for REDD Plus.
Thank you so much, Francis, and very good afternoon to everyone from Geneva. What you all have described so far is this massive value chain of supply of emission reduction and removal from forest, and with that, a formidable number of other multiple benefits, with a growing demand and with standards that are going to ensure that the quality of those emission reduction is assured. So that being the context, where we are now, we are at a turning point. We are moving from a decade of goodwill and negotiations and testing of forest and climate solution into a decade of implementation at scale. And that's really, if we just think about where we were almost 13 years ago, when the famous Bali COP, the Conference of the Parties, that put REDD back on the agenda. At that time, everyone globally was thinking that first, it would be impossible to stop deforestation. Second, even if it was possible, we couldn't measure it, and we couldn't measure the emission reductions and removals associated with that deforestation or that reforestation. And thirdly, even if we were able to stop it, to measure it, it would just flood a very tenuous and weak market that there was at the time, the CDM. Now, 10 years later, we have made massive, massive progress. I can see that because the UN REDD program, as Francis was saying, is the flagship of the United Nations, bringing together the Food and Agriculture Organizations, the United Nations Development Program, and the United Nations Environment Program to support countries meeting their own objectives for the Paris Agreement, specifically Article 5, the only article on the Paris Agreement, in the Paris Agreement, that is focused on a sector, that being forest. So we have made tremendous progress. During this time, Eric referred to readiness. Countries have been able to develop national REDD strategies, therefore the actions to take to stop or reforest. Countries have been able to put in place safeguard systems to make sure that those actions do no harm and actually maximize the goods. Countries have been able to put in place capacity to establish reference emission level, basically the benchmark, and monitoring system at the national level. So that's the sea change that has happened in the readiness phase. And now we are ready to enter a decade of massive implementation at scale with the right incentives.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the right incentives, because I think that really is the key question, because despite all of the progress that you've talked about in terms of readiness, we still don't, we don't have the tide of supply that people like Enric would like to see. And so in her remarks, Mary kind of mentioned some of the issues, the transactional issues in public sector results-based finance in terms of, prolonged negotiations. I suspect that a near-term certainty of offtake would be helpful, maybe something about an attractive price. And I just wonder, you're in conversations with the prospective seller jurisdictions on a day-to-day basis. And I just wonder what you're hearing from them about what a meaningful incentive would look like that would really prompt the kind of often difficult, policy initiatives for politicians to take that would be necessary to deliver large-scale emission reductions.
Yes, absolutely, Francis. And so let me answer, give the first headline first. The missing key ingredient now, and that comes to no surprise, is the finance and the investment. We have seen that, largely at play in the delivery of the Paris Agreement, and very specifically in the context of forest. Because the finance needs to be at a commensurate scale to be able to influence the type of economic transitions that you were referring to at the beginning, Francis. And that cannot be done, with small investment for small projects, because it's an entire development economic pathway that has to be reoriented. I would like to add another consideration at this point, because of course, in these times of COVID, every country's preoccupation is on economic and social recovery from COVID. And so, and at the same time, country's preoccupation is also to maintain forests as our most effective shield against emergence of future pathogens. So bringing that investment now in will actually help us achieve or address multiple planetary crises, be biodiversity, climate, green recovery. And to bring in that finance at scale at this point in time is really what we need.
So the UN Environment Program, this time, last year was talking about 2020 as being a super year for the environment, right? And we were going to have, a lot of major events. And then, as you mentioned, the pandemic hit and changed everything, both in terms of, what's on the short priority list of countries, but also on the UN calendar. And so I wonder if you could give participants in this forum a sense of what you see in terms of opportunities ahead on the 2021 calendar to highlight this set of issues, but in particular, mobilize the kind of financial commitments that the forest countries really need to see to have that incentive really get traction.
Absolutely. So we tend to refer to 2021 as we were using to refer to 2020 before the COVID as the super year for nature. And then we see forest as the most advanced and the largest of nature-based solutions. So what 2021 really offers is the opportunity to bring the evidence, to raise the commitment, and to really connect public and private sector, to connect supply and demand, and really show that these unprecedented conveyor belts of forest solution that delivers on climate mitigation, on climate adaptation, on jobs creation, on economic growth, on biodiversity protection is really possible. Very practically, as I was mentioning earlier, countries have been working on national REDD strategies. So they have studied, they have worked together with all stakeholders group, governments, different ministries within the government, with the private sector, with civil society, with indigenous people. They have worked together to develop the strategies that will allow a large number of countries to address the drivers of deforestation and to massively scale up reforestation. Those national REDD strategies, most of them have been turned into national investment plans. So we basically have the machinery that is ready, that has been built in the past several years, together, as I mentioned, with the monitoring system, with the safeguard systems, and with reference emission level, we have that machinery that is ready to be scaled up. So this year, sending an unmistakable signal that there is demand, that there is finance that is ready to flow at the scale that is needed, public sector and private sector, that there are going to be result-based payments at price that is commensurate. And of course, you know, at the moment, the average price is $5 per ton. And at that price, that is simply not attractive. So sending the right price signal this year, bringing the evidence, bringing a coalition of countries and buyers and civil society that stand ready to say, we are ready to go. We have been working on this together for the past 10 years. Now, with the right signal, with the right incentives, with the right amount of finance, we can really implement this at scale. That is really the opportunity this year. And of course, building on a number of similar statements that have been done in the past, but really this year, making them concrete.
Thank you, Mario. I love the unmistakable signal is what we're trying to get to. Well, with that, let me thank our three panelists for answering my questions. And now I'm going to turn the floor back to George to facilitate a process of answering everyone else's questions. So George, back to you.
Thank you, Francis, and thank you all. Francis, let me ask you a question to start with. How does the Biden administration rejoining Paris help promote art? And are you looking to the new U.S. administration to help engage forested countries initially in a greater interest? Obviously, the architecture assumes that the vast bulk of the financing is going to come from private sources, and an expectation that both CORSIA, people who want to buy forest credits, REDD plus credits in a compliance regime, but also because of the increased interest in corporations in setting their own targets, there's going to be a real demand. The question is, will there be forested countries interested enough in taking on a major change in forest practices to implement this kind of a framework, unless there's, financing at scale and at high enough prices to make it worth those countries to do that, which is a big issue. Can the Biden administration help at least get the countries interested, if not push on the private financing? And if so, how?
Sure. Well, I mean, the first thing to say is, of course, the U.S. rejoining the Paris Agreement, is good news for climate action more generally. And REDD Plus is one of the boats that will rise with that overall rising tide. Because I think, the financing for the role of forests in climate action has been a casualty of the lack of seriousness about climate action more generally. So I think that's the headline. We celebrate that. But in addition, as you may recall, when President Biden was a candidate, he did mention in some of his speeches a prospective mobilization of $20 billion for the Amazon rainforest. So this particular issue has been on his agenda. And if you read carefully his executive order on climate, there's very specific content related to instructing various cabinet secretaries to develop specific plans, not only to follow through on that Amazon commitment, but dealing with critical ecosystems more broadly, and a specific reference to market-based mechanisms. So there are lots of clues in there that there is a commitment to bringing this whole of government approach to climate change to bring to bear specifically on forests. And of course, with respect to interacting with the potential countries that would be supplying these forest carbon credits, diplomacy can go a long way when you have credibility behind it. So I think the prospective U.S. climate action at home will increase the U.S.'s credibility in talking to other countries about what they might do. And in addition, having appointed John Kerry, to be on the National Security Council as a point person for this agenda, couldn't be better. He is a diplomat. He knows, these issues, has been in the climate negotiations, and so would be in a very good place to help use the various dimensions of U.S. influence, leadership, financial leverage to move this agenda forward.
Thank you. A question for Mary. One question came in from a participant about what countries are eligible. Is Nigeria, for example, a country that would be Art would fit well with, and how do you define the universe of countries that you're most interested in seeing become engaged?
Sure. Well, we're quite inclusive, so ART doesn't have any restrictions on participation. And any forest country that is able to reduce emissions and meet the requirements is welcome to participate. Obviously, the challenge with deforestation is most stark with tropical countries. So we particularly are interested in looking at making sure that we can attract private capital at scale to reduce tropical deforestation.
Thank you. A question for both Enric and Mario, but first, part of this, Enric, so you mentioned the nesting concept, and someone asked about whether you could explain that. But I want to ask both of you, how do you see the market developing here? I mean, up to now, the prices for voluntary offsets of $3, $4, $5 or euros per metric ton don't seem like the kinds of prices that will motivate a country to make major changes in its forestry practices necessary to implement a system with high integrity quality credits. But now these countries are going to be looking at carbon prices in Europe, 30, 40 euros per metric ton, Canada, 40 or 50 euros, California, and probably are not going to want to enter into deals at $5 or $10 a metric ton. So I'm interested in how you see that market developing. But first, Enric, could you explain nesting?
Yeah, hi. So nesting is about putting a project under the reference level established at the country level. So how do you bring that into a program that is established at a higher level than where the project is? And that ensures that, for example, its baseline is established at the right levels. It takes into account a leakage that happens basically across a given region to ensure that integrity that we're discussing before. In terms of markets, you were mentioning kind of different programs around the world with different pricing. I think that's one of the things that the Paris Agreement might be able to enable in the future is that interaction between different markets across the world. So if you think about it, pre-Paris, we had several markets around the world that were in a way isolated from each other. And therefore, each one has its own pricing defined by the supply-demand balances in that kind of given program. What Paris changes is that under what we call the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, that you're going to be able to exchange and transfer those different credits from one program to another. And that would increase the connectivity, the potential for connectivity that then regulators can choose or not to enable. And therefore, it could be that over time in a more fungible market across different countries, that the pricing starts to become more unified. But we're not there yet because Article 6 is being developed still. And hopefully on the UN COP conference this year, we might have developments, but that's one thing that is still kind of being finalized.
Mario, any additional thoughts about that?
Absolutely. As Enric was saying, the Article 6 negotiations are going on, and they will tell us the shape of the future. What we are doing, just to get ahead with ART, with Emergent, with EDF, with Forest Trends, we have launched the so-called Green Gigaton Challenge. And the idea there is really to show that it's possible to transact a high volume with high quality in the next few years. And that to do that, with a price that is commensurate. So the idea there is to have a floor price guaranteed by donors, and then to leverage private sector purchases above that price. And in that way, being able to really reach a price that is attractive, and in that way demonstrate that with the right price signal, supply will start to scale up. And supply will start to scale up because all of those conditions have been put in place on the ground to make it scale up. Of course, it's not going to be easy, but this is getting the right incentives and getting a way to grow concurrently demand and supply with the right price and the right standards to ensure integrity. That's what we would like to test and actually scale up with the Green Gigaton Challenge in the next 5 years.
Thank you. There's a question from one of the listeners about international facility for forest finance being worked on by the World Bank. Francis, or is anybody want to comment on that for a moment? The potential here to fund some of the art credit systems at scale?
Sure. So this International Forest Finance Facility is based on an idea that's been around for quite a while of an alternative way of mobilizing large-scale finance and putting the faith and credit of various governments, behind a big endowment fund to be able to kind of have security on the part of the forest countries that, if they perform, they will be financed. So it's one of several ideas that's been simmering out there. There are also people working on the concept of forest bonds that would be financed by the sale of carbon credits and that sort of thing. So fortunately, there are a lot of good ideas floating around out there, but I think back to Mario's point about the unmistakable signal of demand is what we're all trying to create.
Is there again, this is to any of the panelists, is there an opportunity here to create a pool of some kind? In other words, as part of the Corsia initiative, if it goes forward aggressively, airlines are going to have to buy huge amounts of credits. The same is probably true of shipping companies, marine shipping companies. Tech companies want to buy offsets in terms of their voluntary programs. Is it possible to imagine financial sponsors creating pools where 6 airlines could invest in the pool and therefore approach 1 or 2 countries with that scale financing?
Hi, George. Yeah, this is really an idea that has been talked about, is these ideas of the buyers club or buyers clubs, different groups of buyers that can come together and create a very strong demand signal. And I think it goes back to what Mario was saying about one of the objectives of the Green Gigaton Challenge, is to try to pull together those companies, both that are in hard to abate sectors, those that have requirements under the Corsia, and then maybe smaller companies that on their own don't have the purchasing power or the ability to interact directly with jurisdictions, to come together as one buyers club and be able to show that demand signal.
Thank you. Francis, you wanted to speak to the issue of emergence, and then I have another question. So Francis, let me turn it over to you for a moment.
Oh, I was just going to say that one of the mechanisms for aggregating demand is another initiative called the Emergent Forest Finance Accelerator, which is independent from but related to ART in that it is a transaction platform that seeks to pull together supply from various supplier jurisdictions, but also to aggregate demand from the private sector. So in a way, it functions as potentially one of the buyers clubs that Mary was just referring to.
Thank you. A question from a listener about, I think Mario and others talked about the amount of readiness efforts that have gone into the last decade, getting system preparedness, looking at how you actually can monitor, review transparently the integrity of credits over time. And the question is, are there important forested countries which have the capability now to follow through with this kind of a program? I mean, what is the, I don't, obviously Indonesia and Brazil are enormously important in this, but there are a lot of other smaller countries which presumably have even fewer resources theoretically. What is the level of preparedness of countries that you'd like to enlist here? And I guess this is partly for Mario, but also for Mary, Francis, whoever wants to take it.
Yeah, I'd be happy to to jump in and also connect to the question that had been put previously to Mary in terms of eligibility of countries. And I think the fundamental point here is that every country has potential, and the Paris Agreement is for every country. Countries, though, are at different level of readiness and capacities. But this shouldn't scare us, because we're not here for the short term. What we're building here is a massively and exponentially increasing flow of emission reductions and removal over time. And so with that in mind, some countries are already starting to deliver. If you go today to the UNFCCC Lima hub, that is the official repository under the UNFCCC of delivered and assessed results by country, you see already there 4.6 gigaton of emission reductions being officially reported. So there are things that are already starting to move. But the key important thing here is that we are here for the longer run, and that if we get to support countries and following the policy cycle and the capacity and the needs that they have over time, every country has something valuable to offer and to gain from this process. And when I say country, I mean country and stakeholders. Perhaps I know that that's Francis wanted to speak to that. So when I speak to country, I don't refer only to government, but it's the whole of country and the whole of society.
Francis or Mary, thoughts about preparedness, readiness?
Well, maybe let me just speak a little bit about the particular role of NGOs and civil society, which one of the questioners had asked about.
Great.
And I really welcome that question, because as Mario has said, it's not just governments working alone, but in collaboration with other stakeholder groups. And I have to say, I've seen civil society groups play an incredibly important role in the readiness process. So it's definitely an answer to this question. And just, one example, the province of East Kalimantan in Indonesia, which is one of the jurisdictions that's most recently signed an agreement with the World Bank's Forest Carbon Fund, Forest Carbon Partnership Facility Carbon Fund, for a payment for performance agreement. And a collection of domestic and international NGOs have been partnering with the government of East Kalimantan through, several gubernatorial transitions over the last decade to bring that jurisdiction to a level of readiness for performance-based finance. So I think we've got lots of good examples like that of the important role of NGOs in, capacity building and facilitation. But beyond that, NGOs have a very important role as sort of independent monitors and watchdogs. And my colleagues at WRI, who run the Global Forest Watch platform, have recently published an evaluation showing that in areas where there's a higher density of usership of deforestation alerts that are available, from the satellite monitoring, that it can actually have a depressive effect on deforestation in that area, because of, civil independent monitoring of what's going on in the forest can help translate into action to do something about it. And last but not least is another artifact of all of this new data that we have from satellite monitoring of forests is a flourishing of empirical research, that helps us understand what's driving deforestation. There's a blog out today on, what percentage of deforestation is explained by these 6 commodities. We can tell that now. And we can also test hypotheses about, well, if we reroute this road instead of through the forest, around this way, how much forest and forest carbon can we protect? And we can answer all those questions now with thanks to the satellite monitoring. And NGOs and civil society have huge roles to play across the board on all of those.
Thank you. I think that's really important. Question for Enric, since we only have a couple more minutes. What do you think the chances are that with carbon prices in compliance systems like the EU ETS increasing by, let's say, an order of magnitude over the last several years, let's say from 4 to 40 euros, what are the chances that corporate buyers of REDD instruments are going to see some of that, be willing to pay prices that are more like the prices in compliance systems than the recent prices for voluntary offsets? Is this going to make a difference? And if so, how much?
Yeah, so the key to this is on the policy designs themselves. So for example, Europe used to have a percentage of your compliance requirements that you could meet with credits from other countries. That's now gone away, but there is potential for the next phase of the European emissions trading scheme to include credits from other countries. Until now, this was highly unlikely, but in a way, it's back to what I mentioned before, is that Paris allows you to do that because of that interconnectivity. It's just that it takes time to change and adapt regulations to allow for this. So for example, the next period for the European emissions trading program is from 2030 onwards. So it might take a bit of time, but new policies that are being developed in other parts of the world could already, from right now, include the use of offsets. And we're seeing that in other geographies. So for example, whether it's internal incentives such as Colombia and South Africa, where they have their own carbon tax that allows for the use of credits generated from those countries, or other geographies. For example, there's other countries that are exploring connecting with other geographies that would then allow them to import credits from, for example, red tropical countries.
Thank you. I see we're running up about a minute against our hour, so I think I'm going to have to bring this to a close. Thank you all so much for the work you're doing and for participating in this dialogue today. And I hope maybe the Atlantic Council can do more along these lines in the near future. It's been timely, I hope productive. I also want to thank Mary Grady and Windrock International for their partnership in this event, and thank Kelsey Foran, Zeynep Wironen, and Peter Gonzalez, who are our production team, and the rest of the Atlantic Council for their organizing today's event. If you'd like to rewatch the panel or share this stream with a colleague, you can find a recording on the Atlantic Council website and the YouTube channel. And I hope you will promote this to other people who are interested in the subject. It's clear that the whole issue of natural climate solutions and REDD Plus is going to be a very, very vibrant and expanding area of interest over the next few years. And thank you all who are listening for joining us. Have a great rest of your day.